War came to the foreshores of Sydney. Today a service was held at Rookwood Cemetery in honour of the 21 men who died when 3 Japanese midget submarines slipped into Sydney Harbour. The Japanese assault on Sydney Harbour caught our Navy completely off guard. One of the first to spot the midget submarines claims only good luck saved the Allied fleet. In fact, Jim Nelson says some of the things that happened that night were more like an episode out of McHale's Navy. Sydney Extra's Peter Doyle retraced the events with him 50 years on.
When our harbour was invaded for the first time since Captain Phillip, a young sailor by the name of Jim Nelson was on patrol aboard the Lolita.
Well, that was about the position there between the buoy and the rock over there.
He was sent to investigate a report of an unidentified object caught in the boom net stretched across the harbour.
We saw the submarine sitting up nicely, bow out of the water, the 2 torpedo tubes plainly visible, and we saw the periscope turning around on us as we came up.
There was no escape for the midget sub, and before the Lolita could effectively drop depth charges, the sub blew itself up.
We were hit by the explosion, covered with water.
What happened next could only be described as a farce. Rear Admiral Merhert Gold approached the Lolita on the Admiral's barge, not to congratulate them, but to reprimand them.
And he said, "What the hell are you yachties playing at, running around the harbour dropping depth charges? What's all this nonsense about a submarine?"
So he didn't believe there was a submarine.
He didn't believe it.
He was the Admiral and he didn't believe it.
He was the Admiral, and he, quite frankly, was reprimanding us for
waking up everybody.
And he said, "Oh, well," he said, "did you see the captain? Did you speak to the captain?" And we said, "No." We both looked aghast. He said, "Well, look," he said, next one you see the captain and see if he has a black beard." He said, "I'm interested to know if the submariners have black beards in the Japanese Navy." At that point, further up the harbour, looking up this way towards Garden Island, a very large explosion, orange flame, and Muirhead Gill said to us, "What the hell was that?" And Tubby answered him quite happily. He said, "Sir, if you go up the harbour," he said, "you might find your captain with a black beard."
Submarine 124 had fired 2 torpedoes, missing the USS Chicago, but sinking the ferry, the Cuttable.
When the explosion went up, all hell broke loose. Ships were running around the harbour like chickens with their heads cut off.
Shots fired.
No shots for firing. Nobody knew who was firing at who. Nobody knew whose side who was on.
The wonders half our ordinary shipping wasn't sunk by itself.
That's quite correct.
In the midst of the bedlam, the good old Manly ferry was chugging up the harbour, not aware of the danger that lurked beneath. The Lolita tried to turn the ferry around, but the captain wouldn't listen.
If you could look back on it, now it's all over. It was really humorous.
How did you stop the ferry?
Well, we turned around, went back, and we, on the loud hailer, requested him once again to stop, and he didn't. So we just put the machine gun, put a few shots across his bow. A few more shots from us made no difference in the harbour, and he immediately went astern and went back again.
Meanwhile, the 3rd sub was trapped in Taylor Bay. Unable to fire its torpedoes, it was an easy target. Seems to me that it was a lot of luck. Sydney had a lot of luck that night.
It was luck. It was Pearl Harbor about to happen. Had the torpedo hit the Chicago, a heavy cruiser with very heavy ammunition on it, if she had blown, Sydney Harbour would have gone.
50 years have passed, but for Jim Nelson, the memories haven't faded.
And I often wonder now that I feel excited being here today, but I wonder how the families of the men who perished in it, how they feel back in Japan. My thoughts go to them on this day.
And there'll be a reenactment of the Japanese sub-attack on the harbour this Sunday night, starting from 5 p.m. Now, the best vantage points are Bradley's Head, Mrs Macquarie's Chair, Darling Point and Wallara Point. And for a better view, State Transit has special ferries leaving Circular Quay.
Some were there to learn about what happened on the 31st of May 1942. Others remembered the night the war came to Sydney.
Well, I would have been 6 years old at the time, and my father was away at the war. And the sirens started to go and go, and then the big flashlights were going all over the sky. So Mum knew something was wrong. She piled all the single mattresses on one bed, one on top of the other, and there were 5 of us kids. She put the 5 of us under the bed, and she just sat on the floor with us, and it seemed to be an eternity.
Peter Doyle was 10 years old, but what he remembers most keenly is the day after.
I remember I had to go to school, and I thought, the chaps will definitely blown the school up. I mean, it's the biggest building in Watson's Bay. They couldn't miss it. It's the biggest disappointment I like. The school was there, and I knew then that they wouldn't win the war. They're rotten shots.
But among those on board was Jim Nelson, for whom last night had special significance. He was on the Lollita when it approached and identified the sub trapped in the harbour net.
The submarine, with Sub-Lieutenant Churmer in command, waited till we come up alongside him, and when we backed up to him, he self-destructed with the intention of taking us out with him, which he done good, because this time we were caught right in the blast of the submarine. I feel more excited now than I was on the night. We're going back 50 years now, and nostalgia creeps in.
When the spectacular light battle was over, there was a minute's silence for the 21 men who died on the HMAS Cuttable. Last night's event was not without controversy. Some said a recreation was an inappropriate memorial to those who died. Jim disagrees.
Now, none of that is detrimental to the crews or the families that are left behind. I think it's great to come back here and reenact all this tonight and let the younger generation know part of our history.
Tomorrow, just you wait and see.
Alison Peters, Sydney Extra.
Was the night of the submarine attack?
Well, on the night of the attack, there's a boom defence net across here. We were patrolling the Eastern Gate area. We came to here and converged in onto where that starboard buoy is there, and the net was there, and in the net was the submarine, just about that position there.
Jim, who'd warned you that the sub was there? Who'd raised the alarm?
The HMAS Yarramah, who was supposed to be patrolling this area, was at anchor just about here, and he called us over to investigate an object in the net.
Now,
so the net, as I say, was just about there. We went over and we saw the submarine sitting up nicely, bow out of the water, the 2 torpedo tubes plainly visible, the conning tower and the periscope were plainly visible. We went close to it and had a look, and from my naval experiences in the Mediterranean, I readily observed that it was a submarine of some type. This I reported to our skipper, Tubby Anderson, Warrant Officer Anderson, and we had to make a decision what we would do, and he asked me my opinion, and I said we should attack it. It's just about, it was soaring its way through the buoy through the net backwards and forwards, and it appeared that very shortly it would have been out of the net by using a serrated edge sawtooth. And we sent a signal up to Port War signal station up there on South Head that we had identified the object as a midget sub. I sent that signal personally myself, that we'd identified the subject as a midget sub and were going to attack. I received an acknowledgement from the signal station that that signal had been received. We then went up to the sub here. If you can imagine, that the net was there, the sub was in the net coming from seaward. We were on this side of the net, on the harbour side of the net, And knowing that the Sound Pigs Reef was on the other side, we decided instead of going around to go into it, we would come into it from this side, back up to it. The depth charges were on the stern, 2 on either side of the stern, and roll the charge off, and then get the blazes out of it.
Oh, yeah.
And this we did. The submarine, the depth charges being deep sea charges, the same as such as the destroyers use, did not have sufficient depth to activate the pistol, which worked on a depth principle, pounds per square inch pressure, that you all know about, dives with bends and so on, so on, so on, so they didn't go off. So we came around again and dropped another one, and we saw the periscope turning around on us as we came up, and we put the Aldous lamp straight into the periscope, which is about 6 inches by 4 inch periscope, very little amateurish type of periscope, and we dropped the second one and then got out. That didn't go up. So then we went up with the third one, and to this one we tied or secured elliptical buoys, which are about 12 inches round, elliptical shape floats, which we tied about 3 of those on to try and delay the sinking of the depth charge so that it might have a chance to get enough power into the detonator or the pistol to activate it. But as we turned round, very slowly we turned round and backed up to the submarine. We dropped the charge, and the moment we dropped the charge, he self-destructed. He blew up his 80-pound kilogram self-destruction device in the sub. We were not very far from it. We were hit by the explosion, covered with water, almost turned turtle, being flat estuary type craft, only have flat bottom and a draft of about 18 inches. You can imagine what it did to the little wooden boat. It rolled us over gunnels awash. We thought we were gone when big orange flash blinded temporarily blinded, covered with water and debris falling down all over us. And when we came out of it, we looked back and said, well, we're out of it. Then we went back, say a couple of hours later, Admiral Muirhead Gill came up alongside of us with a pinnace.
Probably this pinnace, Jim.
Probably this pinnace, this very pinnace. Or the Admiral's barge, whatever they like to call it. He came on board and in a rather belligerent tone, taking into account that he had been attending festivities at Tresco, the naval establishment, entertaining Captain Bode from the Chicago and a few other officers. He was rather belligerent and a little bit, I'd like to describe as a icky-ticky.
Oh, right.
And he said, what the hell are you yachties playing at, running around the harbour dropping depth charges? What's all this nonsense about a submarine?
So he didn't believe there was a submarine.
He didn't believe
it. He was the Admiral, he didn't believe it.
He was the Admiral, and he, quite frankly, was reprimanding us for
waking up everybody.
Dropping depth charges around the harbour, and he said to Tubby Anderson, the skipper, Warrant Officer Anderson, who was a master mariner, excellent seaman, and he said to him, how would you know it was a submarine? And he said, well, sir, he said, Nelson here, Jim Nelson here, had experiences in the Mediterranean, and he advised me it was a submarine. Muirhead Gill said to me then, how did you know it was a submarine? I said, well, sir, in the Mediterranean, we were attacked by submarines. I saw submarines anchored in the harbour, and I think I'm quite qualified to know what a submarine looks like. And he said, oh, well, he said, did you see the captain? Did you speak to the captain? And we said, no, we both looked aghast. Tubby and I couldn't understand his attitude. Did you see the captain?
They're blowing the submarine up and he was on to see the captain before you sank it.
Did we speak to the captain? Yeah. And Tubby said, no, sir, we didn't. He said, well, look, he said, next one you see the captain and see if he has a black beard. He said, I'm interested to know if the submariners have black beards in the Japanese Navy. At that point, further up the harbour, looking up this way towards Garden Island, a very large explosion, orange flame, what have you. You can imagine 2 torpedoes going off, where Ban, on his submarine, had fired at the Chicago, and Muirhead Gill said to us, "What the hell was that?" And Tubby answered him quite happily, said, "Sir, if you go up the harbour," he said, "you might find your captain with a black beard." And with that, Muirhead Gill went over the side, onto this pinnace, and shot off up the harbour.
It must have been bedlam. What happened? The ferries, they tell me the ferries were still running and with lights on, there was lights on everywhere, shipping was still allowed to run round the harbour. What about the ferries coming down? What happened?
The ferries were coming down. Where we are standing here is the main western channel, which the ferries used to go to Manly. And when the explosion went up, all hell broke loose. Ships were running around the harbour like chickens with their heads cut off.
Shots fired?
No shots were firing. Nobody knew who was firing at who. Nobody knew whose side who was on.
The wonders half our ordinary shipping wasn't sunk by itself.
That's quite correct. Chicago was firing 5-inch shells.
5-inch shells.
And if anybody...
Blow a Manly ferry out of the water with a 5-inch shell.
Well, a 5-inch shell, you've got guidance guardrails that you cannot get a low depression. They're meant for high distance work, up to 30 mile. What use you could do firing 5-inch shells, but nobody knew what they were firing at.
So what did the skipper of the ferry say, Jim, when
Well,
he stopped you?
we then went up the harbour to investigate what was going on up at the harbour, and a Manly ferry come out right into the middle of the action.
With its lights on?
Lights on, all the lights were on. Garden Island was floodlit. Garden Island was all floodlit, all the lights were alight. And we crossed close to the ferry and instructed him to return to Circular Quay and keep clear of the action area. The ferry master told us in no uncertain terms to get the blazes out of it, and he continued on his course. So Tubby said to me,
Well, all this firing's going on while the ships are sinking.
everything, traces were going, red traces, blazes everywhere.
Searchlights.
Right, that's correct.
In the middle of the wall.
If you could look back on it, now it's all over. It was really humorous.
How did you stop the ferry?
Well, we turned around, went back, and we, on the loud hailer, requested him once again to stop, and he didn't. So we just put the machine gun, put a few shots across his bow. A few more shots from us made no difference in the harbour, and he immediately went astern and went back again. And then the following day reported us for running around the harbour firing bullets at his Manly ferry.
Okay, let's take a little break here. Okay.
Well, that was about the position there between the buoy and the rock over there where the boom net stretched across here. The sub was about in this position here.
Jim was a young fellow. What did you feel at that moment? What did you feel?
Not a great reaction, because I had just completed a tour of duty in the Mediterranean. We'd been bombed and we'd been hit, and we'd seen quite a lot of the war. And you must keep in mind, Peter, we were trained naval men to deal with any situation with calmness and efficiency, but to me it was just a sub and another naval action. I feel that I just went calmly about my duties and didn't feel any excitement at all. It's strange, but we were trained to do that. Yeah. We were trained naval active servicemen that had been on action. We were trained to do that.
Terrific. Yeah? Will you need to get any noddies of Peter just to cut down that interview sequence? Well, let's point out how maybe.
Go to the title there. We've got to mention the numbers. Some numbers. The number of the ships. Yeah. This was 124. Okay. Now, Jim, Matsu's submarine 122 came into this quiet little bay to rest up while the bombing was on. What happened then?
The two submarines, Matsu and Ban, apparently rendezvoused here after making a reconnaissance up the bay. They rendezvoused here, steady hour with Lieutenant Athol Townley and Reg Andrew on the Sea Mist, came into the bay doing their search and discovered them on the surface. Andrews got ahead of one of them, which later on proved to be Matsuo's sub, and he's dropped his depth charge astern of it and just about this position here in the bay, they were trapped right in the bay. He saw Matsuo's sub came up, inverted and roll and go down to the bottom. Townley came in behind them again. We were positioned just here off Townley's side. We come up alongside Townley, and Townley then dropped a charge. And oil and everything came up, and later on they both claimed the kill. But although it was credited to Athol in the first part, later on when the true story started to come out, Reg Andrews was more or less accepted as the man who got Matsuo. But it's never really been resolved.
Right. Okay. And of course, the sub here was still intact with its torpedoes, having been damaged before it got here.
Matsuo had been attacked outside the heads. Now, I'm not too sure on this which one it was, but I think it was the Yandra. I'm not too sure of it. But one of the boats had detected Matsuo coming in through the head and had dropped charges. And Matsuo laid on the bottom outside for 3 or 4 hours. He came in much later than the other subs. And when he came in, he didn't know it. None of us knew it until the sub was recovered and found that the bow caps would not release, therefore he couldn't fire his torpedoes in any case.
It seems to me that it was a lot of luck. Was that Sydney had a lot of luck that night?
It was luck. It was Pearl Harbor about to happen. Shall we say, had the torpedo hit the Chicago, a heavy cruiser with very heavy ammunition on it, if she had blown, Sydney Harbour would have gone. I was in Piraeus in Athens when the Germans raided there, air raided, and 28 ships were sunk in Piraeus Harbour that night. And I think I've had enough experience from seeing a harbour blaze with oil from a ship catching fire in the harbour, not so much the damage from the bombs, but the oil all over the harbour burnt the other ships, sent them up, ammunition ships, hospital ships, a whole lot. 28 ships were sunk in the harbour. So I think it could be very well qualified in saying that if the Chicago had been hit, the explosion from her would have set up all the rest and the oil.
Would have been a counter-reaction. It would have been, well, it would have been a night that would have taken half of Sydney up if that had happened.
Half of Sydney would have gone. I'm sure of that, and no hesitation in saying that it could have been a Pearl Harbor.
Peter, why did you ask about the reward?
Okay, right.
All that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jim, I noticed that there was a reward given for the finder of the submarine, the night watchman.
Oh yes, very, very good reward. Set him up for the rest of his life.
How much was it?
He was a night watchman on a very, very low salary, and Cargill, for his diligence, received a £40 reward. And all things being relevant, £40 those days was a substantial sum of money, seeing we were only getting about £6 or £10 a week. But when you look at it in today's light, £40 is equivalent to about $40. But you take into the relevant nature of the finances those days, it would have been.
I think he's offside, he got £10. Right?
Mangle is offside, he got £10.
£10. So that for £50 that night, they got a reward for finding the submarine.
That was a good payment for him. But when we look back in.
Right, okay, go.
Right. Now, Jim, where was the Chicago laying?
Peter, the Chicago was moored here to this buoy and facing up harbour towards the harbour bridge that way. And the submarine, I-24, was laying approximately between this buoy and Bradley's head, you can see there. And he fired his torpedoes, which went just north of the buoy, along this path here, just underneath here.
Would have been just about here then.
About here, and through, down, and struck Garden Island Wharf just in there.
Which would
A
have been
maintenance
probably
wharf.
that red roof building, Jim.
Where that red roof building is,
That's where the cuttable was lying, the
the
ferry.
cuttable was lying alongside of that wharf there, and one torpedo went up the boat ramp that was there and went straight up the boat ramp and didn't explode. The other one exploded. It either hit the cuttable, which I believe it did. Some reports say that it hit the wharf and then blew up. But between the cuttable and the wharf was another boat, a Channel Patrol boat at anchor. I think it was the Lilani. It was an anchor. So she would have went too if it had hit the wharf. But I believe that it did hit the cuttable, and it blew the cuttable up at that point.
Still 19 ratings, was it, Jim?
19 to 22 ratings. Mostly ratings, majority of them were RN, Royal Navy ratings, on their way back from north, being repatriated home to the Royal Navy. Unlucky, one lad I believe was only 18, escaped from one of the ships in Singapore, only here that day waiting his turn to get back home to England, and he went that night. It was one of the sad things of the cuttable blowing up amongst the other ratings.
Jim Bain then in 124 left the harbour. We think he left, he disappeared, didn't he?
Well, that can't be substantiated because the loop, there's two loops across the harbour entrance, and those loops would have recorded his passage out. But the loops on that night operate on a stylograph, like a seismograph report, and the stylograph goes across and records the sound of anything going across. There's no, to my knowledge, no soundings taken of a submarine going out past those loops.
Jim, your belief is that that third submarine that must be in Sydney Harbour somewhere.
That third submarine, to my belief and my technical knowledge of the night, the loop, I don't believe it left Sydney Harbour.
There would be a possibility that Bain, being the brave sailor he was, and when he actually let these torpedoes go, there would have been a possibility that he would have blown his submarine up after that.
The Ban and Matsuo and Chuma were trained naval ratings officers. They were not kamikaze men. They didn't come out here to do or die. The whole idea was for them to get back out of the harbour and be picked up by the mothership and return to Japan or return to active duty. I don't believe, it's not feasible in my mind, but men who were trained in the way of the samurai warriors would have left their boat and gone ashore. They would have committed seppuku, which was a traditional samurai honourable death between the two of them, rather than take disgrace of capture or desert their boat. So I think that it's highly improbable that they left their boat, that they are still somewhere in the harbour in that submarine.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Sure? Do a little bit of the maritime. Okay.
Well, Jim, 50 years later, how do you feel?
Well, I feel, Peter, more excited today than I did on the night of the attack. Standing here now and looking at it, it is very...
Okay, guys.
Well, Jim, 50 years later, how do you feel?
Well, Peter, I feel more excited today than I did on the night of the event. Particularly when I look up at the periscope, which I could have sworn was 6x4, but I see it now, it's only a little 3-inch round periscope. And if you can imagine, as we came up to it, the periscope was just turning round, keeping a sight on us as we came up. I remember the sawtooth going backwards and forwards through the boom net. And I often wonder now that I feel excited being here today, but I wonder how the families of the men who perished in it, how they feel back in Japan. My thoughts go to them on this day. They were brave men and trained naval men, the same as I was, doing a job, and to those parents it must be a bad day. The submarine looks massive, absolutely massive to what I saw overnight, but when you can look back and think that it was half in and half out of the water, and the expanse of water would have made it look much, much smaller than what it is. But that's about all I can think of at the moment, Peter, but it is exciting to be here and see it.
Well, Jim, you wrote yourself into the history of Sydney. It's 50 years this weekend coming up, and people like you, I see that you belong to the Z Force Association. You must have seen a lot of the theatres of war. And I suppose to be back here, just to be one of the lucky ones, must be very gratifying.
It is very gratifying. As you say, one of the lucky ones. I came through with a minimal amount of war injuries, but you think of all the men that came back. If you go to Concord Hospital and have a look through Concord at the wrecks of men that weren't so lucky, I do consider myself very lucky that I am able to stand here today with you and look at this and recall 50 years ago.
Right. Jim, I'm looking forward to seeing you on Sunday. You'll be on Ferry, you'll be on...
I will, yeah. Dean and I will be.
No, these guys will be, and we're sitting in a report at Allison.
You get that mountains over there. Yeah.
shot now? There you go. Copy. I am. Stand back. Okay, fine.
Happened on the May 31st, 1942.
Well, I was on the patrol boat, HMAS Lollita, and we were patrolling the West Gate, and a midget submarine attempted to enter the harbour and got itself caught in the boom net. It was following the Manly ferry in and apparently got caught in the wake, turbulence, went off course, and instead of going through the gate, went into the boom net. When we approached the submarine, it was trying to saw itself out of the net with its bow cutters, and when we decided that it wasn't an enemy submarine, it was about to get loose from the net, I sent a signal to the Port War signal station to say we had a submarine, apparently an enemy submarine, attempting to enter Sydney Harbour. When it looked like it was about to extricate itself from the net, we decided to make a depth charge run, which we did. We dropped one depth charge. It did go off owing to the depth of the water. Deep sea depth charges for big depths. We made the second run. There's no result again the second run. When we made the third run, because the depth charges were rolled off the back of the patrol boat physically, we backed right up to the sub and rolled one right over, nice and prettily, right under it. And just at that time, the submarine itself self-destructed. In other words, it had two 80-kilo charges on board for the purpose of self-destructing when they were caught, and she self-destructed and nearly took us with it. We heeled over amid the debris, the explosion, the water all over us, and then we managed to get out.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you.
You're doing it. Yeah, I'll do it now, right?
Right.
Can you tell us how prepared you were on the night of the attack? That's in terms of training and readiness. And secondly, did you expect an attack? Did you have any forewarning of an attack?
There was no forewarning of the attack. We were prepared. The Navy, particularly the patrol boats of that night, the Channel Patrol boats, as they were called, little wooden pleasure craft seconded into the Navy. We had done excellent training and our crews were well prepared. But the complacency of Australia was apparent in our crews because nobody expected what happened. Now, the experience gained by some of the senior sailors, myself, a senior sailor at the age of 20 going on 21, who had had experience in the Mediterranean on board the HMAS Perth. We'd been involved in submarine attacks, in a battle, not in the Battle of Matapan, in the Battle of Matapan, that was a surface fight, but in the evacuation of Greece and Crete, we were constantly harassed by E-boats, torpedoes shot at the Perth, and I had had considerable experience in that
eventually with the Perth being hit by a bomb, killing 14 of our crew and rendering us inoperative for a while. Now, getting back to Sydney after coming back with this wealth of experience at the ripe old age of 20, I was placed onto a patrol boat with some inexperienced crew, and it was my job as coxswain to train that crew, and the training was excellent. Now, on the night of the attack, the crew responded, and on the other patrol boats, they all responded. The ones that did not respond, and the ones that would not believe what we had to tell them, were the upper echelon, and mainly because there were festivities on that night at Tresco, where Admiral Muirhead, well, his real title, Acting Rear Admiral Muirhead Gould, Royal Navy, was entertaining the American ship's officers, particularly the Chicago, Captain Bode of his Chicago. Now, if we can get back to the submarine actually getting entrapped in the boom net, when Tubby Anderson, my skipper, asked me what was going on, what was it, I told him that in my opinion it was a midget submarine. The serrated edge, the sawtooth edge, the diamond cutting wire was hacksawing through the sub. And Tubby, Warrant Officer Anderson, had only been in the Navy for 3 months, was not a naval man. He was seconded into the Navy, or volunteered for the Navy, and given a warrant officer's rank and put on charge of the Channel Patrol boat. Now, Tubby, not because he was frightened, but just because he was inexperienced, said, "What the heck do we do now?" I said, well, in my opinion, we should send a signal to Port War and see if they are expecting a submarine in that we haven't been told about. So by this time it looked that the sub was going to extricate itself, and we had no knowledge of a submarine coming in. So Tubby and I had a quick conference and decided that attack was the name of the game. So I sent a signal to Port War signal station saying, enemy submarine caught in boom neck, attend to attack. That was the actual signal. We then made our depth charge run onto the submarine, and 3 charges were dropped. None of them went off until the submarine finally self-destructed.
Did those charges actually hit the submarine and bounce off? Would they have known you were there in any way?
No,
or?
the first 2 we made on the run.
Right.
In other words, the submarine was caught in the net from the seaward side.
Right.
Now we had to make a decision whether to go outside to the net and attack the submarine from the seaward side, or a frontal attack from inside on the harbour side. Now the decision was taken to make a frontal attack because just outside the net, that position, is the reef commonly known as the Sound Pigs Reef. And we considered it dangerous to try and get a depth charge run, those circumstances, so we decided to make a frontal run, that's from up harbour to seaward, make a broadside turn, bearing in mind that the depth charges are on the stern, right, and I have to roll over the stern. Right. I have to make a broadside run, and as we come around the run, to drop the charge and then go out. Now the first 2 runs were made in that fashion, but when the depth charges failed to go off, the 3rd run we made, we came up, we stopped and reversed up to the sub, almost within 20 feet or so.
Was something sticking out of the water at that time?
The sub was sticking out of the water at about a 45-degree angle. Its stern on the bottom, and the bow cutter back about as far as the conning tower were sticking up out of the water, caught in the boom net.
So quite obvious to you then it was a submarine?
Quite obvious, no doubt about that. Now, after that, we had about another 2 hours before Muirhead Gould came down the harbour in his Admiral's barge, pulled up alongside of us, or drew up alongside of us, I suppose is a better word, and came on board. He was still in his mess jacket gear, which is his entertainment gear, as you call it, social gear. And he came up and his first words to us, "What the bloody hell are you yachties playing about?" And Tubby was a skipper. Tubby answered him and said, "We have just attacked a submarine which has blown itself up." At that time, quite honestly, we didn't know whether our charge got it or he self-destructed. Right. The self-destruction came later. At that time, we were convinced that our charge had gone off and we had got it. Right. But we hadn't got away quick enough. That was our... Right. Tubby said, "We left that a bit late getting away. We nearly went with our own charge." Right. So we believed then that we had got it. And Muirhead Gould then said to Tubby, "How did you know it was a submarine?" And Tubby answered him and said, "Well, sir, I really didn't. I saw that it looked like a submarine, but my coxswain, Jim Nelson, has had experiences about it, and I relied on his experience. And he advised me that it was a submarine." And Muirhead Gould said to me, "Now, how would you know it was a submarine, a young fellow like you?" And I said, "Well, sir, I just had a tour of duty in the Mediterranean. I was in the Battle of Matapan, the evacuation of Greece and Crete, and we had experience against submarines." I said, "I've seen them on the surface in the harbours in the Mediterranean. They've cruised alongside us when we've been at sea doing battle exercises. I'm very firmly convinced with my experience that it was an unusual submarine, a very small one, not the normal type of submarine." And he said, "Right." He said, "Now listen," he said, "if you fellows see another submarine, see if the captain has a black beard." He said, "I understand all Japanese submariners have to have black beards." So he said, "Will you let me know if you see another one?" And he said to Tubby then, in the meantime, he said, "Put yourself on report and report to my ops tomorrow morning." And just that moment, all hell broke loose up the harbour. The cuttable went up. Even where we were down at the harbour mouth, virtually, we could see the orange flame and everything go up there. The cuttable started firing 5-inch guns, and
the cuttable, or probably the Chicago?
The Chicago, I'm sorry. The Chicago started firing. Every other ship in the harbour thought it was an air raid, so they were firing at anything and everything. As you saw tonight, tracer bullets in the air, right, guns going everywhere. Nobody knew who was who and who was fighting what, but there's a war on, let's fire everything into the air. They weren't aware it was a surface attack, because getting back to your original question, our defences were poor, inadequate and badly managed at that time. They had no radio contact with the ships at anchor. There were over 40 naval vessels in the harbour at the time, plus other cargo ships. But Muirhead Gould had to send an officer out in a boat to each one to tell them that submarines were in the harbour, or suspected submarines in the harbour. The other only signals were signals by Aldous lamp, which is a naval signalling lamp. You've seen them with a trigger on them and a telescope, and you signal by light, click-clacker on the shutter. And a naval officer had to go around these boats one by one to tell them it was radon. There's no other way of communicating with the ship on the harbour. Now that was a negative for our defence.
How was Gould when he came onto the Lolita?
Lolita.
What sort of condition was he? Excited, or how was he?
He was belligerent, aggressive, and obviously under the effects of his entertaining at Tresco.
Was he drunk?
Wouldn't say that. I couldn't say that. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a police officer.
And you'd be in a pretty excited state at this time, so
No,
you
I
probably
wasn't.
didn't...
No, I wasn't excited. He was. But let's be kind of a man and say he was inefficient, not performing his duty well because he was under the effects of his entertaining at Admiralty House Tresco.
Right. Now, at this point, given that you were way up the harbour at the boom net, what happened then? What did Muirhead Gould do, and what did the Lolita...
He got back into his barge and scurried off down the harbour, presumably to see if he could find his captain with a black beard on a submarine.
Right.
We then came back down the harbour and joined into the general chase. Later on during the night, or very early into the hours of the morning, I think 3 o'clock or something like that, if memory serves me well, two of the submarines, captained by Matsuo, Sub-Lieutenant Matsuo and Sub-Lieutenant Van, were caught on the surface in Taylor Bay. They'd apparently arranged to meet there after the attacks to plan their escape back out to sea where the vessels, submarines were waiting to pick them up. The Steady Hour and the Sea Mist, captained by Lieutenant Apple Townley and Lieutenant Reg Andrews, in scouting around all the harbour foreshores, come onto them in Taylor Bay. Now, Reg Andrews
They
claimed...
were together on the surface at that
together
point?
on the surface.
Oh.
And Reg Andrews claimed that he went up in front of one of them, dropped his charge exploded, and he saw the submarine inverted, turn turtle and go to the bottom. Now, Apple Townley also claimed that he dropped depth charges, and now there's two claims for the kill.
Right.
Reg Andrews and Apple Townley. Now, in the Admiral's report, in the Admiral Muirhead Gould's report to the Navy, he gave Apple Townley the credit for the kill, but I feel firmly convinced in my mind that Reg Andrews deserved the kill.
Right.
We were on the outside of the two of them as they went in for the attack, and then the rest of the night, well, the rest of the next 48 hours was taken up by patrolling the harbour foreshores and search.
Right, right.
Seek, search and destroy mission.
Right.
But to no avail. The following morning, or a couple of days later, Matsuo's sub was recovered from Taylor Bay. That's the one you see all the photographs being taken, lifting it out of the water. That was Sub-Lieutenant Matsuo's sub. And Van's sub has never been found. Now, out at the heads, I'm going backwards now, on defence, out at the heads were two loop devices. They were loops. It wasn't actually covered. There is what is called a loop station with a loop under the water across from North Head to South Head, and another one near just outside the boom defence net. Now, these loops record sound, not electronics. Now, the Japanese, being aware of this, planned to follow in behind a ferry. Chuma waited till the Manly ferry came across, and he got behind the ferry, and when the ferry crossed the loop before he got to the boom, if you are familiar with a seismograph, as used in earthquakes, a stylus on a round drum, and as the Manly ferry went across, the stylus zigzagged across on a graph, and then Chuma, coming in behind him, had a little graph behind him. Now, the signalman or the watchkeepers on the loop at Port War Signal Station is where the first bungle really came in. He called his mate and said, funny little wiggle on the loop or something of that effect. and they did not take any notice of it. Now, when Matsuo came across the loop, the same thing. It was a funny little wiggle, they took no notice of it.
Did he follow a ferry or a boat in, or he just came in?
He just came in.
Right.
Now, that was the first bungle on the part of our defences. If those signalmen had reported a strange crossing, but they put it down to a tug. At that time, we must give them some credit, at that time, tugs used to go out to sea with garbage of a night, and a tug would tow a big garbage barge out and drop it out at sea. The bottom of the barge would open and all the garbage would drop into the ocean 3 or 4 mile out and come in. So they just said, oh, it's probably a tug coming in behind the ferry. So it was dismissed. That was the first bungle. The second bungle was that my signal was not taken seriously. The third bungle was Muirhead Gould coming down and not taking us seriously until the cuttable went up, and that was the first real warning they had that something was on.
Did Muirhead Gould have any indication at that time? I mean, the explosion happened quite a long way from where you were.
Yes.
I mean, it would have been hidden by Bradley's head even.
No, the explosion, the orange...
Went above that.
Went above that. You could see it quite visibly from our position at the boom.
Right. And what was Muirhead Gould's immediate reaction to that? I mean,
what the hell was that?
Right.
That was all he said.
And he jumped back in his own little boat and off he went.
And off he went in his own little barge and off he went down harbour. We had no other connection with him other than that.
Right.
Now, reports in naval history say that he had been passed messages that something was going on in the harbour, but according to naval reports, he chose not to take any notice of it until the last serious report come in, because everybody saw the explosion at the boom. And that's only then 2.5 hours later, he was stirred into action.
It's strange because at that time there were warnings of increased submarine activity around the immediate coast, and there was even indications of people picking up Japanese signals up on the peninsula on their radio. I understand the Japanese were operating on a frequency just off TUE, and in trying to tune to TUE, they were hearing Japanese voices.
Well, better than that, New Zealand picked up Japanese transmissions and were able to decode them, that submarines were operating in our waters and they were heading down our coast. These signals have been sent a week to a fortnight before from New Zealand to the Australian government, and they were not heeded. Now, another angle on this is that America, MacArthur particularly, and Curtin, our Prime Minister, were at loggerheads with each other. Curtin, because of his concern for the Australian people, was not privy to secret reports that MacArthur and Chamberlain were getting via a machine called the Ultra, Magic, or the Enigma.
Yeah,
three names that went by. Enigma was its real name at that time. Now, the story of the Enigma was that a Polish technician escaped to England. He had enough knowledge of it to build a model of this machine that the Germans were using, and unbeknown to the Germans, we had now broken their code. Now, Churchill sent another copy of this machine to MacArthur, and they had decided between them that they couldn't divulge this material to Curtin, because Curtin, in other words, they said Australia was expendable. And if they told Curtin of impending attacks or danger, two things would happen. One is that Curtin wouldn't keep it privy. He would tell the Australians what was happening, going to be attacked. And secondly, if they did pass that information on, the Japanese and the Germans would know we'd broken their code.
Right.
So MacArthur was between a cleft stick.
Right.
The importance of a total war or Australia expendable.
What happened to your captain the day after? Was he summoned to Muirhead Gould's?
He never went, nothing happened.
Nothing happened, nothing ever...
Nothing ever came out of it.
Was anything written in the report about your action?
No, we were scrubbed right out of the report. Right. Muirhead Gould wrote a 13-page foolscap report. The Sydney Morning Herald of the day called for an inquiry, what do you call it, a commission, Royal Commission on the defences of Sydney Harbour. A great cover-up, in my estimation, happened. And Muirhead Gould put in a 13-page report, of which I've got a copy, which praised the Navy's defences, the fact that we had averted a... It was a Pearl Harbor about to happen, there's no doubt about it. And because Tubby Anderson was a warrant officer and Townley and Andrews were naval men, Tubby was not on the pecking order, shall we say, and he was just disregarded, and there was no report, but Lollita was the ship that first really discovered it was a submarine, and another chap, Sub-Lieutenant Ayres, on the HMAS Euroma, who was supposed to be patrolling that gate. We were on the eastern gate. He was duty night on the western gate, but what did he do? He went to anchor. He went up to... He didn't patrol, he just anchored. When Jimmy Cargill, the watchman, came over to Euroma and told him there was something in the net, he wouldn't go over. He was 21 years of age, and he wouldn't go over. He sent a stoker over with him, and they come back and report it was a metal object caught in the net, and Ayres is on record. This is not my opinion, this is on factual naval record, but he considered it was a magnetic mine and decided not to approach it because it'd be dangerous. Getting away from the report, my answer to that is, what, on a wooden boat? That a magnetic mine was dangerous to a wooden boat? However, he then called to us on the eastern boom to come over to investigate this object in the net. So we came over, and that's how we became involved, because of his inefficiency. I can't think of the words to describe it, but he was castigated in Muirhead Gould's report and asked to explain why he shirked his, in other words, shirked his duty, and called us, another boat, to come in and do what he should have done in the first place.
On the when Tuma's submarine blew up, was any of it visible above the water, or at that point?
No, half it was visible above the water.
After the explosion?
Oh no, I'm sorry, after the explosion, no, no. When the explosion went up, we were all blinded by the orange flash and debris all over us, and when it settled down, all it was on the water was a ripple. Right. But we got the blazes out of it at that time. We were some 200 metres or more away. Right. But there was nothing visible, no.
At that time, the torpedoes did not explode, did they? Only the charge that had been set by Tuma?
No, because I'm not all that sure about it. I couldn't answer that truthfully. But the composite sub down below, I believe that the front end of it was from Tuma's sub. Right. With the torpedo tubes intact. Right. The subs were built in 3 sections. Right. The stern section, conning tower section, and a bow section. And then they were bolted together as modules. Right. And that submarine down below is made up of composites from Matsuo's sub and Tuma's sub. Now what parts of which I don't know, whether the stern part is Tuma's and the bow part... No, the bow part couldn't be Matsuo's sub because when they brought it up, it was damaged in the front. The torpedo nozzle caps had been damaged in the front, presumably by a first attack by Yandra, I think it was, who dropped charges on it outside the head. So the front part of it, unless it's been restored, I don't know, but I couldn't answer that truthfully.
And were the men that were involved in that action awarded any medals? Were they...
No. Townley was recommended in Muirhead Gill's report. Reg Andrews was dropped out. Lollita and Tubby Anderson were scrubbed right out of it. But no rewards came out. I'm sorry, no decorations came out of it. But Cargill, the night watchman, for his efficiency and alertness, was given a reward of £40. In those days, it was a lot of money. I think I was getting about £6 a fortnight or something at that time. Right. To classify it as against today's average wage of $400, £200, you're back at £40 is not much compared to today, but all things being relevant, it was a nice sum of money for a watchkeeper to pick up.
Did you meet that
Cargill?
Cargill.
Oh yes, I met him several times after the war, and listened to his story, which backed up my story. But Ayres, I shouldn't mention his name, I suppose, HMAS Roma never left its anchorage place on that night. Yet, if you're looking at the official history now that's coming out now, and all the reports being published in the paper, was Sub-Lieutenant Ayres, I've said it again, it was Roma that went over, investigated, said it was a submarine, and said to signal the Port War service station that they were going to attack the submarine. Now that has hurt me over all of these years, and now the truth is all starting to come out now 50 years later.
All right, I think that's all we can ask you, Jim. Thank you very much.
Can I read it?
Good on you.
It's even a little